Connie Witt. I'm chair of the Hampden Historical Commission, co-chair, along with Betty Howarth, and our other member is Christina Rivest, who is a technical wizard, thank goodness. And we are going to start off the evening with a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation by Bonnie Parsons, who is a retired preservation planner at Pioneer Valley Regional Planning Commission. And Bonnie, how many years were you there? 25, over 25 years of work in the whole Pioneer Valley. I mean, she covers all of the counties basically in Western Massachusetts. So she's going to give the PowerPoint presentation. And after that, we're just going to move these tables around a little, and we will answer any questions or concerns that you have about National Register districts. Okay, well, let's get started.
I'll stand up here, and I hope I don't block anybody's view of the screen, but here we are. Okay, I'll speak up. Thank you. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about the National Register program and about the proposed historic district for Hampden, and for you to be thinking as you're watching, listening to things, answering the question, what does this mean for the residents of the community and particularly for the people who are within the historic district? Okay. Okay, that's the first slide, so we can go to the next one. But I was thinking that we should just quickly review how the National Register program got started and what it does. And it started in 1966 because so many historic buildings were being lost during urban renewal, and communities were saying they had no way of identifying consistently which building should be saved, which could be let go. So the National Register listing was begun, and as well as historical commissions themselves were made part of every town community in the whole country. So that was 1966, and the list makes way for both individual properties to be listed individually or for historic districts. So up here on the upper right hand, this is a single house within the Pomeroy Historic District in Northampton that would be eligible to be an individual listing. However, it's also part of an historic district, that Pomeroy Historic District. And I think it's really important for everybody to recognize how many of these properties have been listed in Massachusetts and how many historic districts. So we've got the list of 75,000 properties already on the register and 1,700 historic districts. So, okay, Craig. So just to remind you of other towns that are around you, among those 1,700 with historic districts, the Brimfield Center Historic District, Sturbridge's Common Historic District. You drive through Sturbridge, you're familiar with that. Wilbraham has the Academy Historic District and the Ludlow Village Historic District. Ludlow Center shares that Ludlow Village Historic District and has its own Center Historic District. Munson has its Center Historic District. Longmeadow has two, the Longmeadow Historic District and the Longmeadow Street North Historic District. And just to point out to you, you already have one property, which most of you, I'm sure, know, in Hampden that's on an individual listing, and that's the Thornton Burgess house. So the town already has a presence on the National Register list. Okay. So just to give you an overview of what can be, it's not just houses on the register. Structures, this is the Shell Bridge up in Northfield. So we've got bridges, structures. We have cemeteries and burial grounds. This is the Bridge Street Cemetery that you probably know from Northampton. with many of the original proprietors of Northampton that are buried there. Objects and monuments. Amherst has a typical fountain that is on the National Register. And then there are sites. They're usually archaeological sites, but they can be landscapes as well, that are listed for what they tell us about the past. So we have on the register rural town centers and rural landscapes. This is Otis Town Center that's just going on the National Register. A tiny, much smaller than Hampden, but it has put its center on the National Register. And in the town of Sandusfield, this is a rural landscape, just a beautiful landscape. Now, it also, that little rise in the landscape is thought to have been the site in the foundation of the first cabin that was built there in the late 17th century. So it may have some archaeological remains, but many beautiful farm views are also listed on the National Register by themselves. Okay. But just as much as we have the rural that we're perhaps easier to see as beautiful, there are also the fine urban centers like Northampton's Main Street that's on the National Register. And in East Hampton, factories, the old mill buildings that are there, that are on the register. And, you know, they're abandoned, not abandoned, they're vacant, and they're not in use, but they still are on the National Register. And as well as the Northampton, so urban and rural, okay, great. So buildings in the listed historic district can be public buildings. This is Shelburne Falls, a sweet little stone town library, a public building, but just as well a private building owned in the town of Gill, Massachusetts, probably built by one of the Western Massachusetts first architects. And at the same time, we can have a district that has the really old stuff, 1740s Rose House in my neighboring town of Granville, or in Hatfield. Hatfield has 7 historic districts within its town community, and the motel from the 1970s is eligible for the national and is listed on the National Register because it tells the story of the development of the highway system, and the community developed and became part of tourism. It became an important part to tell the story of Hatfield. So then we can have buildings that are grand, high style buildings like Memorial Hall in Northampton, or what we call vernacular, common, usual, not expensive houses. This one in Florence, outside Northampton, which has vinyl siding, vinyl windows, but is on the National Register because it shows how common buildings, ordinary buildings, it's representative of how most buildings were constructed in Florence at that period. Whereas the Memorial Hall, the French Second Empire, is architecturally very high style and perhaps more easily identifiable as something that's eligible for the National Register. So keep these two in mind because I'm going to talk about them a little bit later too. And material integrity, you do have to have material integrity, which means enough of the building is still there, so its structure is still there, many of the details are still there, so that this is a habitable building. But like the Tyringham School, you can tell that there's a lot that could be done to this. First of all, painting, but it also has lost a lot of the trim that originally went up along the eaves. It has reproduction front doors. A local carpenter put in reproduction front doors. It has vinyl windows, but it was just listed on the National Register 2 summers ago. So in Gilbertville's workers' housing, those 3 buildings were all at one time, at the time they were constructed, were identical. They probably were all clapboard, and since then they have 2 different kinds of shingles have been put on the outside, so they don't have to have they do not have to be in their original state. Buildings don't have to be original. They have to be materially stable, but they don't have to be in their original condition to be on the National Register. So we have contributing buildings and non-contributing buildings. Once a historic district is set up, buildings are identified as contributing or as non-contributing. So, for instance, one of the criteria for being a contributing building is that the resources tell about the patterns of history that have taken place over time. So the Tyringham Schoolhouse that you saw takes part in the pattern of history when schools suddenly began to be graded. So prior to that, everybody was in the same classroom. Everybody, no matter how old they were had the same teacher. And once the state began to say this is not the best way to teach your children, then they did 2 classrooms, and that's what the Tyringham Schoolhouse represents, because it's a 2-classroom school for the lower grade and the upper grade children. And so that's the kind of history pattern that we're looking at. Contributing resources may have architectural importance, such as the Memorial Hall that we saw the picture earlier, and also the Gilbertville workers' housing, which represents how the majority of workers' housing looked at a time. They're not grand buildings, but that's what workers' housing looked like at the time that they were constructed in the 19th century. Now, the contributing resources may be associated with people important town history. When the vernacular house that I showed you with the vinyl siding and the vinyl windows, it was a very simple house. That house turns out to have been where Sojourner Truth lived in Florence when she was part of the Northampton Association for Industry and Education. And it's where, just before she went on her speaking tour across the country to talk about ain't I a woman, or I am a woman, ain't I? So that simple house is also on the register for its association with Sojourner Truth. And then some resources, of course, have archaeological significance, such as the landscape that we saw earlier that could have the foundations on it of the very first cabin that was built in the community of Sandusfield. So those are all the reasons that properties, resources can be considered contributing. Non-contributing, if they're fewer than 50 years old, then that they're too young, they feel not enough time has passed for us to evaluate the historical or architectural significance of properties, or they're in really poor condition, and finally, considerably altered. And that turns out fairly often in historic districts, that there will be some that have. There's one in Otis that we're looking at right now that I started out with the National Register nomination, and the wing wasn't looking too good then, but now the wing has, over the couple of winters, the snow has taken down the roof, and it's dicey whether it's going to be called contributing or non-contributing. But you may have both contributing and non-contributing in the same district. So this Westfield Bank, which is architect designed, is contributing, but equally distinctive architecturally is the courthouse, but it was built within the last 50 years, so it's considered non-contributing. However, when it gets to past that 50-year point, it then could be added as a contributing building to the historic district. So, okay. So this is probably the most important thing that I want to point out to you all tonight, and just to go over with you. We're talking about the National Register Historic District. We are not talking about a local historic district. Unfortunately, the titles of the two are so close that people have not, it's not easy to distinguish between them. The National Register Historic District is an honorary designation. The local historic district does carry regulations with it, but the National Register Historic District is an honorary, and it is recognized as such by the National Park Service. A building, any work done to a building in the National Register Historic District does not get reviewed unless it involves federal funding or permitting. So that would mean the kind of federal funding might be a bank in the community that needs a federal permit to change the bank building. That the kind of changes to the exterior of the building would be reviewed. But whatever private owners do with private funding gets no review whatsoever. And if there is a review, the Massachusetts Historical Commission, this Commonwealth, rather than a federal agency, does the reviewing, and they look and see, all right, if this is an historic district, and the state wants to broaden, say, Main Street, and take away, in Hampden, and take away land to make this, the Main Street wider, that would have to be reviewed by Massachusetts Historical Commission, because that's state funding, and it would have an impact on the historical buildings and historical landscape that makes up Hampden Center. A local historic district, the one that most people confuse with the National Register one, needs 2/3 vote of the people in a town to establish it. All right, so the town meeting or your town council would need for the community as a whole to approve it, and 2/3 of the community to approve it. So it's a local decision. It's nothing that's brought from, work with the state at all. And it requires a local historic district commission to review when specific changes are made to the exterior. So those kind of changes, that kind of review is off the table with the National Register Historic District. There's a number of things that people wonder about when they hear about a historic district. I've had people ask me, well, does this mean that I'm going to have my house open to the public 1 or 2 days a year so that people can come in? And the answer is no. There's nothing to do with that. I don't really know where that got started with the garden club or something. Right? And a building does not have to be painted any particular color. These are two buildings, these are Amherst, and as you can see, they're pretty lively. They're not historic colors. Nobody can tell you what to paint your building in your National Register Historic District. As a matter of fact, nobody can stop you if you want to demolish your building in the National Register Historic District. This is a building in my town, about 1800 it was, and a developer wanted to put a newer house on it, and that's what was the end of it. So you have the freedom to do with your building, whatever you want, however changes you want, including demolition. They don't really advertise that, but that is the truth. So, all right, these are the things that do and don't happen. What good does it do you be on the National Register and part of an historic district? Well, municipally owned and nonprofits can get funding from the Massachusetts Preservation Projects Fund, called MPPF. And that is a matching fund of 50% that can be up to $100,000 from the state of Massachusetts to a community that needs to upgrade, say it's town hall or an historic school, anything with municipally owned buildings within the community. So that the two examples of that are the Otis Schoolhouse with a brand new Massachusetts Preservation Project Fund are fixing up this schoolhouse that has fallen off its foundations, and inside it's all cattywampus, and it's really going to be fixed with you get $200,000. So if you have $100,000 of work, Massachusetts Historical Commission will match your $100,000 worth of work. You've got to come up with your hand, but there you go. And there's a special way. Another special way to use the grant is if you have, say, your grant, you have a certain amount of money. If you put of the money that you've raised, 25% of that, if you put it into a maintenance fund, the MHC, Massachusetts Historical Commission, will reimburse the grant for that $25,000. So you've put $25,000 of your $100,000 into a maintenance fund for your schoolhouse or your townhouse. MHC will then put 25 additional $1,000 into the project. So you're really getting something for nothing with that. All right, and many times the communities that have the Community Preservation Act are well, I guess I have 9 seconds. So, okay, this is a good example of CPA funding. In Westfield Center Historic District, which is a vast district, hundreds of buildings, are putting CPA funding into this Italianate, well, I guess with Renaissance Revival building, which is privately owned, but that's how it works in Westfield. And if you go through it, you'll see it on the corner of Elm Street. And it's a building that is certainly going to be a worthwhile investment for the community, because architecturally it's very significant. It's been there for a long time, and what they're going to get with the commercial and then rental real estate up above is certainly an enhancement to Westfield. Okay, great. Yep.
Oh, you're good.
Oh, yeah, you gave it to me. Okay. Tax credits. There are 25% investment tax credits for projects that are profit producing buildings that are on the National Register that are being rehabilitated, so that 25% of the federal tax and the state tax can be written off of the cost of rehab of a building that's on the National Register. So this has been across the country a real boon to historic preservation, because this actually is right just a couple blocks down from the earlier building that we were just looking at, Renaissance Revival building in Westfield Center. And it has been rehabbed using investment tax credits. And it has, I worked on it, so I know that these apartments in here are just beautiful. And and they have apartments across the back. It's a very deep building. And there's housing now for people within the community that didn't exist before, but it is an income producing property for whom the investment tax credit was available. It made possible that. Okay, another benefit is just plain old community pride. This is in Agawam. This is the Smith House. That is a 1700s house that was in really bad condition. But it was, the Community Preservation Act funds were used for it. And it has become a real point of pride within the community that they have this wonderful house. That the school kids come here, every school when there's regular school, they learn about life in a 1700s house. And they've set it up just beautifully so that the old well is there. We were able, when we worked on this property, to find out how it was constructed by scribe rule construction, so children learn about, or anybody who comes to it, not just children, but learn about the different means of construction in the 1700s. And benefit 5 nominations provide the history for school children. And this is a schoolhouse. I also was able to work on a project with a number of 5th grade school teachers from the town of Lee. And they looked at the old schoolhouses in their community and in surrounding communities and taught the 5th grade about the local history of the town of Lee, and using properties that were on the National Register. And they were able to trace things from the earliest days of the one-room schoolhouse, like this one that we're seeing here, to later versions of the schoolhouse. And it's become part of the 5th grade local history curriculum. So, and benefit 6. National Register nominations and can serve as sources of community planning for the planning department. So Springfield has, you know, the Armory, which is all on the National Register, but across the street was Federal Square, which was not on the National Register. And a lot of plans and projects were projected for how to use these buildings. And because it was on the National Register and the significance of these buildings and what went on here, and not only the very first buildings, but the other ones, the MI 5, I can't remember what the Garand semi-automatic rifle that was used during World War II was developed. M1, that's right. Thank you, whoever said that. The building where that was developed is right behind there, and they understood they had something historically significant. It wasn't the history, the Revolutionary War history. It wasn't a World War I history. This was World War II history. It was more recent history. It was within 50 years, and made all of these buildings very important. And because we could tell them what went on here, where the firing ranges were down in the basement, where they had a forge, where all the things that they did within the building, all of that information came into play with this building that's now boarded up, but is not going to be torn down because its significance is known to the city of Springfield, and they'll wait till the right kind of planning comes along. All right, I just picked out a few pictures from the inventory of Hampden, just to point out to you, what you've got here in the Hampden Center is equally as good as anything that I've shown you within the historic districts of Northampton, of Gill, of Amherst, of any other of our communities in Western Massachusetts here. So Craig Donester, I think is the last one. And that recognition of what you have here is appropriate. You know, there are wonderful buildings. Anybody driving through the community sees it can see it as an historical whole, can see the oldest buildings, can see the more recent buildings. You get an idea just driving through what the history of the town, and when you see some mill buildings or you see some of the shops, you understand barns, you understand what kind of a community it was just looking at it as you go through. So, all right, that might be it. Yep, that's it. Okay, that's my rundown for you. And I'm happy to answer any questions. So, anybody? Yeah, Connie.
You said that the restaurants and meal will have a little.
Sure.
You want to come up here?
We'll sit. Can I move this, Craig?
I wouldn't.
Okay. All right, then we're going to separate ourselves. Or maybe wait. This is like this. Bobby? Would you come up here and sit with us? And where's Bonnie? We're nowhere without Bonnie. We gotta have Bonnie. Yeah. Daddy?
This way of the screen.
And for folks on the phone, we are monitoring chat, so if you have any questions, you can send them through and we'll pick those up as well.
Okay, there are a few introductions that should be made here. We all know Bonnie now. And Bobby Albano is the chair of the Wilbraham, co-chair of the Wilbraham Historical Commission. And sitting next to her is Betty Howard, who is the co-chair of the Hampden Historical Commission. And next to them is Bob McCarroll, whom I have known for over 40 years. He has spent his life in preservation. Both Bonnie and Bob have received preservationist awards from Mass Historical Commission. Bob is also and has been on the board of Springfield Preservation Trust for probably about 40 years, Bob?
More than 40 years.
More than you care to think about. And way over there in the green dress is our newest commission member, Christina Rivas, who is a technological wizard. And next to her, running the computer, is our new selectman and Christina's husband, Craig Rivas.
And just before we ask questions, just to let everybody know we are recording the session. Legally, we have to let you know that we are recording it.
Okay, so now that we know everybody, are there any questions or concerns? Don?
Talk about the widening of the street. Does it have to be in the national, if it's in the National Register and the town wants to widen the street or put sidewalks in, is that, you have to get some kind of approval of that?
Right, if you're on the National Register, they will, it's just one of the questions that goes into any development like that, change like that, you know, will this project affect anything listed on the National Register?
What about running water? So if we're gonna widen the street, put sidewalks in, we should do it quick.
Well, we're gonna-
Only if you're using federal or state money.
Right.
If you're using town money, the review clicks in with federal money or state money.
Thank you.
My house would be toast if they widened the road.
Yes.
Let's put that out there.
Definitely would be.
I have a question. Aside from, because it appeared to me that most of the benefits or most of the factors were advantageous to commercial buildings. So as a private homeowner, the only advantage is the honorary title.
Right,
Okay.
right. Currently, there's nothing available for no funding available for private property-owned house.
So the benefit, one of the benefits would be possibly getting some finance of some type of the historical building. Possibly get some help with some of the repairs that need to be done.
Yes, like,
Or
yes.
town hall or.
Yes, exactly. Churches too. Work on the exterior of the church. Can't do the interior, but you can do the exterior of the church.
Cemeteries as well?
Yeah, cemeteries as well.
And there are 2 cemeteries in the proposed district. Both of our cemeteries, Old Cemetery and Prospect Hill, are at the very ends of the district. So money, yes, money would be available for fixing those cemeteries, and they need it now. It's been over
The St.
10
Mary's wouldn't
years.
be part of that?
Excuse
This is
me?
the one up here, St. Mary's, right, the other side of Prospect?
Well, yes,
What is
St. Mary's is within the boundaries.
Within the boundaries, okay.
Yes.
Because you said Prospects, I didn't know if it cut off like,
No, we
Okay.
didn't, we're not taking the road.
I'm just asking. I didn't know how the boundaries are.
Does anybody know if there's a donut-shaped area within St. Mary's that is not part of the Catholic cemetery?
Heathens are buried there?
I guess, it's not part of, and there are burials there. But it's a very odd configuration.
That's kind of an interesting little tidbit.
That's where we put the Lutherans. Yeah.
So let me ask you this, to Wilbraham's effect, somebody I had heard, I may be totally wrong, but the signs that are in Wilbraham on Main Street, that they didn't want to go into the National Register, but they put historical signs up there just to designate the area?
Right, right, exactly. It's just, was something that, years ago, we had, a vote that was taken, to make our Main Street corridor, in particular, a historic, district, which got defeated. So anyway, we were cognizant of that. So we also wanted to acknowledge our historic center area. And so we did that with the signage that we chose and through our commission and through budgeting requests.
So the only thing that's actually designated is Munson Wilbraham Academy.
Right,
Okay.
yes.
I just heard that recently, after I saw the signs, I heard about it.
Wilbraham Academy, our national registers,
Right.
Wilbraham Academy and down on Faculty Street and then Old Post Boston Road area.
Yes.
What about an individual house outside of the district? Because I live in a house that they said was built in 1759.
You could put it on the register yourself if you wanted to. This is so compact and so much pushed into one small area that we thought this was a good place to start. But the Thornton Burgess house is on the National Register and has been for decades. And so if you wanted to do the research yourself, you could, or you could contact a preservation consultant like Bonnie, who would do the research for you. Her prices are exorbitant. No.
And Massachusetts Historical Commission has a do-it-yourself form that you could get, then you would fill it out. It's still pretty laborious, but you would probably have fun doing it. And then send it in, and they will edit it, so that would be helpful.
But it absolutely doesn't limit what you can do to your house if
Correct.
you're on the list.
Or not do your house.
Right.
Right, like if you didn't want to mow your lawn.
Right, you want to mow your lawn.
Right.
Pink house, you're fine. with
Right.
pink house.
That's zoning.
Huh?
That's zoning. A lot of towns have zoning laws that you can't let your grass get above a certain level, so.
We don't have that.
Just
No, you're right.
You were talking as an example of widening the road.
Yeah.
That's not something that's like in the works, right? That's,
No, I'm just talking about in general, a principle. I'm trying to give you an example so that you understand what the
Okay.
permitting might be.
Now, when a house
You
is,
mentioned the 25% investment tax credit.
Yeah.
Is that available to only public buildings?
No,
It's income producing buildings.
Income,
Right.
commercial?
Right, right.
Well, not necessarily just commercial. If someone were the owner of a two-family house and were renting it out, they could take advantage of it. If it were an owner occupant who lived in the first floor of a two-family house and the second floor apartment was being renovated, they might take advantage of it. I mean, part of the federal tax credit, though, is you have to do what's defined as substantial renovation to historic standards. So the tax credit, no one can sort of say, oh, I put on a new roof, now I want my tax credit. There has to be a certain amount spent on the project in order to access the tax credit. And then the work you do has to meet the federal standard. So vinyl siding a house or sandblasting a historic brick building would be verboten.
any other questions?
when I lived out in Denver, I worked on a bunch of buildings, and they were commercial buildings that had national landmark status. Is that a whole separate thing with The ones that get the.
Bonnie, you might be able to better explain that to me.
Well, I'm not sure that, a whole bunch of buildings would have national landmark status, but they might have national register. National landmarks are things like Jacob's Pillow Dance Festival, and when they're really, really, they're nationally significant. But probably the buildings that you were working on were National Register
Yeah,
listed.
they were probably,
Yeah.
we had, we went through a lot of trouble to get that.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
So what would be a reason that an individual homeowner would not want to be on the register?
I
Are there
I
any?
kind of can't figure that out, Karen.
Okay.
Is there anybody here who is opposed, who could give us a reason why you wouldn't want to be on the register? Yes.
Yeah, so I think Craig might have clarified it for me earlier online, but, so last year, my insurance company was, just saw the age of my house, and, they had wanted to raise my insurance because they just assumed that because of the age of my house, I was in a historic district. My, insurance agent clarified that our town didn't have one, and I guess I was just worried that that would end up doubling my homeowner's insurance.
No, it's not going to have any effect on
So
your
that's the
insurance.
other
You
voted
may
on.
have gotten a high price because your house is old. And a lot of older houses, if they have older
Oh, they,
electrical
my
work.
agent had told me it was specifically because they thought I was in a historic district.
No,
Yeah,
I don't
but
know.
that might be, assuming that voted on, different
No.
historic district now.
I've never heard that. Have you?
Well, certainly, if you were in a local historic district where the outside of the district is controlled by the local historic district commission, and let's say you had some sort of catastrophe that destroyed a great deal of the house, the local historic district commission certainly has the ability to say, you got to rebuild the Victorian front porch as it existed. You can't just go to Home Depot and buy some 2x4s and put on a contemporary deck on the front of your house. So there are indeed cases where if you're in a local historic district, you could find yourself, if you had, a disaster, that how you rebuilt, at least on the outside, controlled. Even in a local historic district, they don't control the inside. But sometimes, these houses, like I live down near Mattoon Street, which is a Victorian row house street, where the houses have crown moldings that are this big, and they have marble fireplaces, and folks that want full replacement value in case there's a disaster, their insurance premium's a lot higher because you just don't get marble fireplaces at Home Depot anymore. But once again, that's.
Yeah,
His insurance company just arbitrarily said.
Yeah, if
Right,
it is,
it was my homeowners, yeah,
Yeah.
and I
so
was
if it
actually
is
away for a
that,
few
what they're
days, so I came
thinking
back
is
to
it's going to
voicemail.
cost more.
Yeah.
So for the local district,
Excuse me?
for the local district, if we had standards, which it's not the route we're going, it would cost more in the event that you had to use your homeowners, which is why in some cases they do raise the rate on the homeowners insurance. That's not the route we're going, so the
Right.
homeowners insurance
So
should
that's
not be
even
affected in any
worth
way.
discussing, right?
No, nope.
Right. So basically, in essence, the national registry that you're discussing, whether or not we wanted to, we'd be part of it. Because if,
No, not necessarily.
oh, all right, that's good to know.
Well, yeah, I can explain that. If more than 50% of the people in the proposed district write into Mass Historical Commission and say we do not want to be on the register, then they hold back that nomination. But that rarely happens. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
Yeah.
see.
What about, I'm sorry,
Oh, no.
what about if you go to sell the house?
What about?
Doesn't affect any of the
No,
type of thing.
no.
Good.
I would think it would improve it with snow. It's saying it's in.
being in the historical district.
Well, wouldn't that dictate to a certain degree, depending on the structure, that it's kept up to a certain, like if you sold the place, you know, they weren't gonna start ripping it apart and, you know, doing whatever they wanted to. Isn't there some kind of in perpetuity kind of control over that?
No.
No, she just said that before, that
It's just
there's
like-
no control.
Well, I wasn't
Being
paying
on a-
attention.
Please answer.
We'll stand.
So there's
My
really,
understanding is if an individual doesn't want to be in the historical district, they may write a letter and say, I don't want to be in it, and then that individual dwelling is not. Is that
No.
correct?
They can write a letter, but half of the people, they need 50% of the people writing in similar letters to say, okay, we won't have an historic district. But you can't exempt yourself just your house.
Oh, you can't, oh, you can't
No,
exempt,
no,
oh, that
no.
was, I didn't understand
Yeah,
that.
okay, I'm glad you clarified that.
Um,
Yeah.
So does this involve putting a sign on your house at all, or?
You
No.
No.
You can put a
Okay.
sign
Yeah,
on
brass
and,
plaque.
they're actually bronze, mostly
They're
bronze,
bronze.
and there are several companies that, I think they're licensed, aren't they, to produce plaques for your house. So you can, you know, the name of your house, the day it was built, on the National Register of Historic Places.
There's
If
no
you want one,
requirement
you
to
can
have one.
But you don't have to.
But you
The
don't have
roadside
to.
history.
That's actually some, I found
So
that
it's your
the
property,
insurance
pretty
company
much
had
do what you want,
specifically
you wanna put a big old
they draw
billboard
out
that says John Smith stuck here, you could.
Right.
Is that
Have you
how-
ever
I
checked
do.
with the zoning?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're into a
District
whole
requirement
level
to have a
of
sign?
bureaucracy.
No.
Now, I didn't, I'm sorry,
Any, no,
jumping again.
go ahead.
I didn't get it clear in my mind. Why didn't Wilbraham want to go through with doing it?
Ours was a local district.
Just a local
issue.
district?
Right. What-
You weren't
it-
planning to do the national, or they didn't want to do the
Well,
national?
we're on the National Registry with our academy area
Right,
and faculty, but that's
but it didn't affect
different.
the rest of
But the
them.
local district historic route did not successfully pass.
We tried the local thing too once.
No, well, not since we've had an historical commission.
Um,
We haven't tried that. We've tried other things and they haven't passed at town meeting. And this is like something that doesn't affect your pocketbook or
Kind of a nice
your
city.
house or your property rights or anything. And we just figured this is, you know, we've tried everything. And this is the only thing that we can do that we didn't think people would be opposed to. And actually, when we sent out all of you who live within the proposed district who got our mailing, who responded, sent back the postage paid postcard that we enclosed, 73.68% were in favor of an historic district.
Yeah.
That's close to 3/4 of the people who own houses within the historic district. Yes,
For people like myself that threw that card away, are they still going to be on that register?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Unless you
Got
get
voted
50%
in.
of the
Don't have
vote.
to do a thing then, right?
but you can write a letter, but if you still want to be on, yes, you're going to be on if it passes at town meeting. And we're hoping that people come to fall town meeting, which is October 18th, right?
18. And this will be voted,
October 18th.
this is gonna be voted on that night?
Yes. What's the National Register District? It's not that the town is going to vote on the National Register District. What you will be voting on is the $9,300 that is for the consultant to do the work and submit it to Mass Historical.
I have a question. So once on the National Historic District, can the town then change the zoning laws to require stricter whatever?
It would need a
for-
2/3 vote at a town meeting,
But I
so
mean, that is a possibility. And once it's accepted, you know.
it would need a warrant article signed for it, and then it would need to pass by 2/3 vote, which if there's people against it, then you're gonna have.
Right, and Connie just said they tried everything so far, it hasn't worked.
There is no way we're going to try a local historic district. Obviously, Wilbraham was unsuccessful, and they have just as nice a Main Street area, maybe even nicer than Hampden has. But they have been on the National Register for quite some time, a couple of decades. But 79.
I have a question. If this was passed as a in the National Registry, and all the buildings along that zone would be, not have to have any standards, what about the old Cumberland Farms building?
Good question.
That would be a contemporary non-conforming.
Okay. That's definitely not.
I should say that.
It's the black mark on the.
It'll fall down again.
Yes, manageable.
Should just do a big fence.
Yes, Don.
Seems as though the biggest benefit is for public buildings potentially accessing this
Exactly.
$200,000. So for this building, or for the old schoolhouse across the street, it's
Yeah.
beneficial for the town.
Well, that's,
Not only that, it's also for our cemeteries, for our village green with a statue, which we use CPA money to have that restored a few years ago. And we could use it for work in the cemeteries. And if you get a mass preservation project fund grant, you can match it with CPA money, which means nothing would be added to the tax base. We could get 50% from the state. And this is, remember, this is a grant. It doesn't mean you're going to get it. But we could get 50% from the state and match that with CPA money and end up,
So in theory, the
basically.
$9,300 fee could be absolved by projects like that,
Right,
more than pay for itself.
right.
so it's beneficial for the town as a whole.
Yes.
Right, and CPA money has only certain purposes that it can be used for. Affordable housing, parks and rec, open space, and historic preservation. And this comes under historic preservation.
One of the categories that you were showing were a lot of the historic commercial buildings. And I was just wondering if you identified many commercial historic buildings in the district?
Within the district? I thought about that, and there aren't too many commercial ones. That we do have a couple of two families.
Yeah.
And one of them used to be a Baptist church, and it would be really nice if somebody wanted to restore the exterior of that.
Okay.
And also Casabella. And Casabella is very old. There might be people here who remember Hatch's store many, many years ago. But the house is much older than that. And if they did want to do a massive restoration on the exterior, they could apply for that.
But there's no one here from them, right?
No, in fact, all of the business ones that I sent out, except, or that we sent out, I think Todd Pelletier, who I believe owns the Levine Dam, which is within that area. He was the only one who didn't come back. Casabella came back, and the other, the hardware store, and I hope we didn't send one to Cumbies, but maybe we did.
Came back and returned.
They came back to us. So, yes. Did you have another question?
No.
Okay. Yes.
At the town meeting, I remember you standing up and talking about it,
Forever.
and then people voting on, I mean, you would just have a small crowd right here.
Yep.
And that room was filled maybe 2, 3, 4 times as many people. The people outside of the district were concerned about spending the money and not getting the program through, as I understand the way the voting went. Is there a guarantee?
I think there was some misinformation about that at the town meeting. They thought that being on the register was going to affect town-wide, when it's only going to affect this little district here in yellow. So anybody that lives outside of it wouldn't affect any of their houses. So some of the people thought that if they were on it, then they would be restricted from doing things.
So how is that message getting out?
But if you spend that money to have the research done, is there a guarantee that it's gonna come back and fulfill what you're trying to do? I think that was part of the question that people didn't understand.
There is a possibility, but I'd say it was pretty slight. You're the one who submitted, so.
Well, I have only been involved in one historic district where that there was enough objection to its being listed that it was canned for a while, and then it was brought back up and it went through, and all the same research stayed there. That's one in 25 years of maybe, I don't know, 100 districts, something like that. So it's a very small percentage that the number of objectors held it back for a while.
So there needs to be some education.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's probably incumbent upon the people that are at this meeting right now, dispelling some of the rumors.
Like you saying that it won't increase your homeowner's insurance, and us saying that you can't make us not paint our house white, or, I think that's the biggest thing that people have said to me when I said that we're going to this meeting tonight is, oh my God, they're not gonna let you paint your house a different color.
Yeah,
And
that's
that, and that is the most, I bet you 5 people have said that.
Oh my God.
I have a question, and maybe this was asked already, so I left for a few minutes. Right now, with the historic district, there's no restriction on your house.
Right.
Is there any chance that later down the line, that could change? Because I've talked to somebody about that, and they said, oh, right now, you're not limited. But 5 years down the road, are they gonna say, oh, now we're saying, we're putting all these restrictions in, and we don't have the liberty to do with our house what we wanted to do? You know what I'm trying to say? Right now, you're saying no restrictions.
And if that ever came to pass, all you have to do is go to town meeting and vote it down.
Yeah, but if you voted, that's just assuming it gets voted down.
How do you think, can you reverse the process? So if that did happen, like Karen said, and it made the changes, could a town remove itself from a historic district classification?
Well, the town would have to, the National Register, the only reason we have to do this at town meeting is because we need to pay the consultant. A group of everybody that lives in this district could get together themselves and submit a nomination without even going to the town.
Oh.
I mean, this is the only reason we have to is because.
So 93 people could give $100 each and not even ask anybody.
Right. Yes.
There you go.
Well, yeah, there we go. Well, that might have to happen. We'll keep you in mind.
Thank you. I was born on the 4th of July, so I'm all about history.
So, it's like, if you're saying now that changes wouldn't happen, but there's always a possibility that it could change and we have to vote it down.
There is, as Bobby Albano explained in Wilbraham, that's what happened. They have a National Register district, and then some other people got together, they wanted, and it did not pass.
That was for the local.
That was the
For the
one.
local.
But one thing I can cite is that the Wilbraham Academy, which is part of the district that is on the National Registry, has undergone a major renovation. And you see it with the exterior. The sidewalks have been replaced. The adjacent houses that are part of the 65 acres. And then running down along Faculty Street, obvious changes there. The only thing I can foresee is if any of these National Registry districts have to widen a road, that then it involves, more complex issues. And how would that impact, I don't know, the frontage of existing homes, et cetera. But I don't foresee really any major issues with your homes because there are no guidelines. You don't have to have anything painted a certain color. You don't have to conform to anything. It's just as is. As you give example, if you want to paint your house pink, you can. Now, a local district is something, a registry is something different.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand the difference between the local and the
Right.
national.
I'm just saying that Wilbraham Academy provides a perfect example of an area that has undergone this kind of,
That's now.
right.
I'm talking future.
Well, they've been on the registry though since 1979 and have undergone this major renovation process. So.
I think she's saying that, okay, an administration comes in, let's say, and they decide to throw the baby out with the bathwater and change the rules of the game. So
Right.
now, all of a sudden, your property is being impacted by a change that you didn't foresee, but will come down the pipe.
Right, exactly, that's what I'm saying.
But that can never happen.
Who's doing this?
I don't understand whom you're thinking is gonna come in and
Are you
take
asking about-
over. I don't understand.
No, what I'm
So,
saying is,
Can I clarify the question? I'm sorry. Are you talking about changing from a national register district to a local district?
No.
Are you saying the National Register would change the regulations
yes,
behind
that's
it?
what she's
Yeah.
saying, I'm trying to
So
get
do
at.
we ever foresee the National Register or the state changing the regulations on a National Register district to become more restrictive?
Or does the state of Massachusetts have existing restrictions on homes that are listed on the National Registry?
That would take, in order to do that, would take a change in federal law.
Well.
And,
Okay.
well, I don't mean it to sound facetious. It's, this is 1966 put this down as how we're supposed to be. I mean, anybody can come in, we can conjure up any sorts of changes in our communities that we can't pinpoint either the reason or the agency that would be doing it and make us afraid of things. 1966, it was laid down that we would have historical commissions in the town. We're supposed to have an honorary list. That's what we're relying on, and we trust.
Has
That's
it
We
changed?
trust.
It hasn't changed.
It has not changed since.
Okay, so in 45, 46 years.
55 years.
Okay,
55 years.
it has not changed.
There's not
So
been
that's-
change.
Yeah, that's, I think, the best way to say it, because if it hasn't changed in that many years, we're not gonna live long enough to see a change.
We won't be around to discuss that.
Bobby, when the academy renovated so extravagant, did they qualify for 50% funding?
That's something we don't have knowledge of. I mean, because that would be, I would assume that they would have gone that way. They would have requested funding. But again, that's something that I don't know about.
Well, but the Preservation Project Fund is a public fund. They maintain a list of to whom they give money, so one could find out
Yeah,
whether
I
someone.
looked at that list. You know, you can backtrack. I looked back to about 15 years, and, you can keep searching and see where the grants have gone and been awarded.
It may be true that these regulations may not have changed since 1966. But a month ago, would you imagine that the CDC would be issuing mandates, closing businesses?
Uh-oh.
So things can change.
Yes,
I
in
personally
my
don't like-
line of work, we look at what causes death. And what causes death and what causes life changes from day to day. So you can't predict all things. You can't predict what's going to get cured and what's not going to get cured.
But you can certainly predict the trend, and this is not the appropriate place to get into such a discussion, but you can easily see the trend in the change in the intrusiveness of federal government.
I guess my offset to that would be, what benefit would the federal government or the state get by adding additional restrictions? They're not getting any additional money. If anything, it would only be, homeowners insurance would potentially go up, but that's a private corporation. So at this point, there's no benefit for them to make any changes to that type of, to the type of guidelines that are out there.
Okay, are there any other questions?
I just wanted to point out for the talk about information and sharing, this time around, we did do a letter out to all of the individuals within the district with obviously the brochure, the map, all of that. We did also make it available online on the website for the town, so anybody who wants to access that definitely can. We've put it in the forums, the Hampden forums. People can access it through there as well. So we definitely have tried to spread the information a little bit further this time around, and make it more accessible to individuals who aren't here tonight. This will also, obviously is recorded, this will also go out on the website for people to access so they can hear the answers to questions that were asked real time.
I think it was.
I would compliment you on the literature that you sent to the houses, because I've heard only raves about it.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
clear, concise, informative, and as, you did a great job.
Yeah, it was very well.
And it's more tonight.
Excellent.
Well, I just want to add, and I think we all are concerned about this, is informing our residents to the best of our ability when we have issues like this that come up. And what does happen is then when there's facts that are not true and rumors occur, and then that gets spread, and then you spend a lot of time trying to quell that. So, you have to look at, well, what works real well? What works here in Hampden? How are you effectively communicating and educating your residents? And, you have to kind of pick up on that, whether it's through, we have like a web forum that we use. Sometimes it gets fiery, a little too fiery, but, the Times is wonderful. That's a great way to communicate, and the literature you're handing out.
The Facebook, you can do it on the Facebook pages for the town.
Exactly, that's wonderful, and any possibilities. I think today you have to be very innovative, and especially with something like this. And I think tonight is an excellent step, and if you have to have other little forums as you get closer to your town meeting, then go that route, because it's good. It puts people in contact, and people bring up the negatives and the positives, and then people come away with the facts. And so that's something I can just suggest.
I think that's very true.
Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
Please remember, on the town meeting,
Good. And please grab a donut on the way out. We don't need 4 dozen at our house. Kids will love them. It'll be nice and high. Yeah, no sugar at all.